The purpose of this presentation is to give an update on the district's financial status and to provide rationale for the levy and the proposed issuance of bonds by the Eastland Board of Education scheduled for this December 2015. Every year, Illinois public schools are required to conduct an audit of their finances. This audit is done by a third party, and every school is required to have a financial profile summary prepared by that auditor. That summary is based on indicators that the Illinois State Board of Education has identified as records of stability, of financial stability. They look at a district's fund balances, their expenditures, their days cash on hand, and how much borrowing capacity that they have based on their assessed valuation. You can see that in Eastland's most recent financial profile score, we received a score of 3.90 on a 4-point scale, which is considered financial recognition status, which is the highest category of financial stability reflected in the instrument. And here you can see that this we were able to do despite some volatility in the assessed valuation of property in the district. Between 2010 and 2015, the district's taxable wealth declined 25%. In real terms, this means that the district's ability to raise revenues declined by 25% during that period of time. The Board of Education was able to balance budgets during this period of decline based on responsible spending, some sharing of services with neighboring districts, and also by reducing our total staffing levels as we were able to because of declining enrollment. Fortunately, as you can see, in the last 2 years, that taxable wealth has come back up some, and that rebound is going to be important in helping us with future budgets. And as a final indication of our status, you can see that in September of this year, the Eastland Board of Education approved a budget that was sent to the Illinois State Board of Education and returned as being balanced with no deficit reduction plan required. Nevertheless, it's important to note that there are 3 significant threats to funding for Eastland and other public schools in the state. The first is a proposal to shift the state's burden for pensions to local districts. The pension cost shift would essentially require local school districts to pay pension payments that have traditionally been the responsibility of the state. This would have the effect of requiring expenditures that we are currently using to fund education to pay pension costs that have never been the school's responsibility. A second piece of legislation is the property tax freeze. The property tax freeze would, after this coming tax levy, freeze the next 2 years' extensions at 0% increases, and all subsequent extensions at the consumer price index. This is particularly problematic for districts that are mostly dependent on local property taxes for their revenue. Finally, a third piece of legislation, the funding formula change, would take state money that is currently being given to districts like ours and redistribute that money to districts that have less equalized assessed valuation. So even though a very small portion of the Eastland budget comes from the state revenues, this funding formula change, if it became law, would take $500 of the $600,000 that we currently receive and essentially redistribute it to other school districts in the state. And these threats, these pieces of legislation, impact local decision making. I have recommended and the board has approved a resolution of estimated taxes to be levied this year in December that represents an 8.7% increase over the extension last year. I've told the board that we need to do this because if the property tax freeze is passed into law, all future extensions for the Eastland district will be based on the baseline that we set in December of 2015. And if the funding formula change passes, The board's going to need some of this revenue to make up for the $500,000 that the state is promising to take away. This extension would not cover that gap, but it would help. In addition, I have recommended and the board has approved a resolution of intent to sell bonds, either working cash or life safety bonds, to replace the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems in the oldest part of our two buildings. Estimated cost of this work is $3.5 million, and this work is necessary because we recently had an audit conducted that shows that these systems are in need of replacement. A benefit is that if we replace these systems with new geothermal systems, we will save money over time that will help offset some of the initial cost. I think the most important feature here is if the systems would fail in the future and they are 65 or more years old, the district would be in a position where it would have to spend reserves in order to take care of the problem, and those are reserves that are probably going to need if the funding threats become reality. So it's been my recommendation to the board that they do bond to do this work and that they pay that bond back over a short time, maybe 10 years, and that they do an aggressive debt service schedule with higher interest payments in the first years. Because if they do this, they will capture the favorable interest rates that are currently available in the market, and although it will cause an initial spike in the tax rate, it will minimize the total amount of taxpayer money that is being spent to service the debt. And it will quickly restore the bonding capacity each year that we make a principal payment. As I said in the previous slide, this will have the effect of raising taxes, and it'll raise them highest in the early years. How much will depend on the interest rate and how the board decides to structure the debt, and obviously on the value of your home or property. Below is an estimate of the impact on your taxes based on an aggressive debt service schedule that I am recommending. In the left-hand column is the value of a home or property, and in the far right-hand column would be the total increases in taxes next year over this year if the board approves the levy and the $3.5 million bond sale. It's important to note that this is based on the aggressive payback schedule that I'm recommending, and also it's important to note that we haven't shopped out these bonds yet. We may be able to get a better interest rate than I've estimated here. To give this some context, in the current market, the shorter the term of the bond, the better the interest rate that we can get. And you can see that if we take this approach and go back with a 10-year payoff instead of a 20, although we pay some higher initial taxes, we reduce the interest paid on that debt in totality by more than $600,000. That literally means that less of our local money is going to service debt. So in summary, I have recommended to the board that we levy an 8.7% increase over last year's extension in order to set that baseline tax extension at the level that it can be at for future levies. I've also recommended that we sell bonds to do work that really needs to be done. This has the added benefit of improving our operational costs, reducing them, I should say, with geothermal systems that are more efficient than what is in the buildings now. And the added benefits of improving the heating and the quality of the air conditioning and the air exchange in those spaces. It further protects the reserves that the district has accumulated, and it protects them from the threats that are represented in the state's fiscal problems. And it gives future boards of education and future superintendents some non-referendum bonding capacity that they may need in case of emergencies. I thank you for paying attention to this presentation. I encourage you to ask me any questions that you might have about it, or to attend a board meeting to learn more about it or ask questions at that time as well. Thank you.